ain't good.
A little brake boost. Nada. And the gauge is getting power because I have the light and the gauge itself powered off of the same switched circuit so that I know if the light's working that the gauge is getting power. Nothing. So, yeah, this gauge is not working. Well, got the aftermarket oil pressure gauge installed and we're looking good. Cold start, 75 psi oil pressure. If we were losing the bearings or the pump, no way it would be that high. But I'm gonna let it warm up and see where she's at. Now that's more like what I'm trying to see. It was 75 on initial cold start and now it's at about 67 pounds. So I'm gonna let it warm up and see what it drops to. So got the car idling a lot better than it was with some fueling changes. And it's been idling for about 5 minutes now. And oil pressure is still at a solid 60-ish PSI, maybe 61 or 2 PSI. Maybe, no, not 70. That's like 62-ish, but some people like having all the exact same gauges in their car. I really don't care. Best deals I can get. Bought that used, and then put a new sensor in it, and bought that new, and paid about the same for all three of them. Paid like 40 bucks for that, 75 bucks for that, 70 bucks for that, 65 bucks for this one. All of them are electronic except for obviously the boost is like a mechanical, it's got a vacuum line to it. But yeah, these are both electronic. Got oil pressure now instead of the inaccurate factory gauge and sending unit. And they're all good brands, man. Marshall. Then you got AEM Yugo, and then the Autometer 30 PSI gauge. So, and then I have a GPS heads-up display which isn't working currently because I don't have a cigarette lighter and I don't have my jump box in here to power it. So, and then I got my camera mount on the window. All the other gauges work though. The temp gauge works, and the voltage works. Gas works, tach works, speedometer doesn't, but that's what I have that for. So yeah, she's running good. Oil pressure's holding well. So yeah, I think I'm good. I'm not worried about this engine now. Alright, so far we are up to about 150 degrees. Car is at idle and it still has near 50 psi of oil pressure. It does have 20 W50 in it, so it'll probably take the oil a little while longer to heat up than the coolant. But I have a feeling if we had bearing issues or oil pump issues, that oil pressure would be significantly lower already. The spec is like 17 to 25 psi at idle with 5W30, and this has got like 5 sets of bearings slapped in it. So with 20 W50, I'd be happy with that pressure. And it looks like it's going to settle like around, but it still goes up with RPMs. So I think oil pressure is fine. I think it's just a matter of, large clearances and an inaccurate sending unit for that gauge. Because it was showing a whole lot lower than this. It was showing like maybe 5 psi at idle and like maybe 20 psi, 25 psi at cruise, if that. So it was way off. I'm glad I got this gauge in here because I can trust this one. Alright, car has hit full operating temp. The fan just kicked on and dropped it down to there, but it hit full operating temp. And we're showing about 35-ish psi on the gauge. And if I rev it up to, say, 2,000 RPM, here, let's do 2,500. That's like 62.5 pounds of oil pressure, so I'm good. This car is fine. I'm super happy about that. Fuck that thing, it had me tripping. But I still did 140 mile an hour pull after deciding that I was not going to care if it blew up when the bearings were bad. I was like, I'm just going to send a rod through the block or it's going to do a nice pull and the gauge is inaccurate. So I'm glad that's what it was. So sometimes you have to make a tool using an old shitty Harbor, well, not a shitty, but using a Harbor Freight titanium inverter flux core welder, because you figure out that your new oil pressure sensor for your aftermarket gauge is 1/8 inch NPT and your factory oil pressure sending unit threads are 1/8 inch BPT, British pipe thread, which means that it is 27 turns per inch, or the 1/8 inch NPT, which is 20, or no, this is 27. 1/8 inch NPT is 27 threads per inch, and BPT is 28 threads per inch. So I just bought an 1/8 inch NPT tap, and unfortunately I could not fit the tool in there or find a socket that would fit tightly on the square drive of this, and I didn't have room to spin the tool because it was right up against the oil cooler on the oil filter, or the oil filter sandwich plate cooler. Jesus, can't talk today. So this is my solution. I had to go and grab something, and so my buddy's welder was sitting there, and I just powered it up and frickin' burned a couple of welds. Didn't scrub the tool, didn't scrub the chrome off of this, just straight burned it in and welded it. And this thing is a permanent solution to any issues that I have, because it's just a quarter drive socket. Use an adapter to a 3/8 wrench. Make sure that you run it in by finger first, the couple of threads that you can get before it binds up from the difference in thread pitch, and then you just run the tap in and it just moves the threads enough to become 27 threads per inch and doesn't actually compromise them, so then you can thread in your 1/8 inch NPT oil pressure sending unit for your aftermarket gauge. So another thing to note here is I was going over the data log of the previous run before the 140 mile an hour run that was just third and fourth gear. And it looks like I actually hit a max of almost 6,000 RPM in third gear on that run, which when I went back over the video, you can't hear in the video that I am definitely turning it higher in the first one. So I'm gonna try and run the gears out the next couple of data logs at 20 psi, maybe 21 psi, and see what the car feels like running it all the way to 6,000, 6,200 RPM, and see what she likes. If it doesn't feel faster, if it feels like it noses over, I'll keep shifting at lower RPM. But if I can avoid the larger torque spike and actually run the power band out, that would be nice. But I've been kind of scared to run it out that high, so Excuse me. We also saw a 1060 AFR on this run too, so that definitely needs to be leaned out all the way across the board. Manifold air temperature is only 54 degrees. Says 85% duty cycle on this one too. So I don't know if that's just because it was so rich. Almost 20 degrees of timing. Says 86.8 TPS. So right before, okay, so yeah, it logs peak boost is almost always right at peak RPM. And it looks like right after I let off, because if I go one time frame back, it goes to 100%, and it's like 50 RPM less, and there's more boost. Because that's right as I let off is 18.3, and then it averages like 17.9, like right around 17 and a half pounds. You can see right there, 16. So it definitely boost creeps a little bit. And then fourth gear. So like I said, about 17 pounds, which is what I thought. And then it boost creeps just a little bit to 17.2. And I let out at 5100 RPM in fourth gear. And that was 73% duty cycle at 17.2 pounds. And then if we come over here to max boost was 18.2 pounds. Max duty was 85%. So that's weird that it did the same max duty cycle at like, hold on. So max duty was at 18 pounds. It was 85.2%. 1060 air fuel ratio. But at 20.7 psi on the other run, it also logged a max duty of 85.2% at a 1060 air fuel ratio. That's odd. I don't know. That's weird. I know the wideband's accurate because it matches the Megasquirt on the display. And I can tell when it's rich and when it's lean based on how it smells and what comes out of the exhaust. And everything's kosher. It's where it's supposed to be. So I don't know what is going on with that, but maybe it just, I don't know, needed more fuel. Or maybe it was because the RPMs were so high. I don't know. But yeah, I just figured I'd share that with you guys that I actually ran the RPMs out almost all the way to 6,000 on this one, and that I still was super rich. So we're making some progress.